Hello, and welcome to another look with Christian King. Today, I am back for the third time in as many days, I believe, or close to it, to do the preview show for UFC on Fox 31, Lee vs. Iaquinta 2. We are not going to cover this entire fight card, but I have three fights that I have picked out that I want to talk about a little bit, ending with my favorite fighter at lightweight, Kevin Lee, taking on Iaquinta in a rematch of a fight that he lost in his UFC debut when he was only 21 years old. He's now, I believe, 26. I think Iaquinta is still pretty similar. I think Kevin Lee's evolved a lot, but we'll get into that in just a little bit. We're going to talk about what they have listed, and not just because they're the top three fights on the card. They just happen to be the three that I want to talk about, and they happen to be listed as the top three as of right this second. I'm not sure what the final order of the card's going to be. I feel like what I'm looking at right now is on MMAJunkie.com, and it's just a long list of fights. It's not really split up into different time slots, so they might move some of these around, but as of right now, we're going to work our way up in the order they appear right now. We're going to start off just really quickly talking about Rob Font taking on Sergio Pettis. So Rob Font is coming off of a frustrating loss against Rafael Assunção. He got outstruck, out-wrestled, out-grappled en route to a unanimous decision loss. And Sergio Pettis is coming off of a very frustrating unanimous decision loss himself, where he was controlled by Jussier Formiga and spent most of the time on his back, or with Jussier on his back, and was unable to shake him off, and then just ended up losing a frustrating decision. In my opinion, he should have taken risks in order to try and get that position freed. He should have been willing to jump and roll forward and try and land Jussier on his own head. He should have done anything other than just sit there and wait for the time to run out and lose a decision. But that's one issue with Sergio, is that I don't think he takes enough risks. I think it's good to not take too many risks, but I think sometimes you just got to take risks. Sergio is a young man still. He's 25 years old, and he's now moving up to bantamweight. So he's moving back up 10 pounds in weight. Taking on Rob Font, who's a pretty good sized bantamweight in my opinion. Rob Font is 31, so he's not too old himself. Here's how I see this fight playing out. I am worried about Sergio Pettis' ability to take good shots. Sergio Pettis, in my opinion, does not have a great chin. We've seen him hurt several times. In particular, I think about the knockout loss he had to Ryan Benoit. That was at flyweight. So moving up to bantamweight and taking on one of those super fast, athletic, hard punchers, which bantamweight has a lot of, I think that's going to be a problem for him. And I think Rob Font is about as bad as it can get without throwing him right into the top three. And obviously, I think TJ Dillashaw and Cody Garbrandt would probably be the worst matchups for Sergio Pettis at this weight class, or maybe John Lineker might be the very worst. I'd worry about that one a lot for Sergio. But I think Rob Font, honestly, he's a pretty bad matchup for Sergio too, and I think he's going to be able to hurt Sergio. He's bigger, he's longer, he hits way harder, and he's also a very technical striker. He's not just a brawler. He's got a really great creative striking style. In particular, I think about him putting it on, what's the Brazilian guy's name who was on Thomas Almeida. He really put it on him and stopped him, and man, I can see him doing that to Sergio as well. Sergio is more defensively sound than a fighter like Thomas Almeida, but I worry about his ability to take those power shots, and I think that Rob Font's going to get to him, and I think he's going to get to him in the first round. So I'm taking Rob Font to win that fight by a round one TKO stoppage. So let's see what the odds are for that. Sergio Pettis is the underdog, as high as plus 143, and Rob Font is the favorite, as high as minus 157. So yeah, I guess the odds makers are kind of seeing what I'm seeing as well. Definitely favoring Font in this fight. Okay, so next up after that, we've got a really interesting fight. We've got Edson Barboza, who's had a tough run as of late, taking on Dan Hooker, who has had an amazing run as of late. So this is a real crossing of the roads fight. You've got one guy who was at the top and now he's kind of on his way down, and then you've got another guy who we thought might just be another middling featherweight, but then he moves up to lightweight and shows major improvement, and now we're thinking of him, despite his 17-7 record, that might not jump out to you. I'm looking at Dan Hooker as a real potential contender in this lightweight division. This is a really hard fight to call, so let's look at a few of the details here real quick. Dan Hooker he's a big dude. He's really big for featherweight. He's 6 feet tall. He's 28 years old, and he is coming off of so he lost a unanimous decision to Jason Knight, and that was his last fight at featherweight. And if you go back and watch that fight on November 26th of 2016, he had his last featherweight fight, lost the decision unanimously to Jason Knight. And if you go back and watch it, it doesn't look anything like the Dan Hooker that we know and love now. Since then, he moved up to lightweight, knocked out Ross Pearson with a knee punch combination, submitted Mark Diakisi, by guillotine in a fight he was winning, knocked out Jim Miller with a knee and a follow-up punch, pretty similar to how he knocked out Ross Pearson, and then he knocked out Gilbert Burns with punches after that. So he's just been on a tear. Meanwhile, on the other side of the card, we've got Edson Barboza, about 5'11". Basically, these guys are about the same size, but he's a little bit older. He's 32, and we've got him. He had a couple unanimous decisions. So he lost to Tony Ferguson, and then he beat Pettis and Melendez, and then he knocked out Beneil Dariush, but he was losing that fight. He was getting pressured and backed up, and in my opinion, he was losing. He got the knockout with a perfectly timed flying knee, and then he got just bludgeoned by Khabib, and then even worsely, that's not good grammar, but he took an even worse beating shortly after that at the hands of Kevin Lee. And those fights were less than 4 months apart from each other, and he took absolute beatings in those fights. So these guys are really meeting at a fork in the road. And, Edson Barboza, if he wins this fight, he buys himself a little more time to stay in that top 10 and try and work his way up. If Dan Hooker beats him, I think that's the last we see of Edson Barboza anywhere near a title shot, anywhere near contention. And I think Dan Hooker will take it from there and replace him up at that spot. But, that's if Dan Hooker can get past him. I'm not so sure of that personally, but it's a hard pick. So just based off of combat sports, and particularly MMA, is built on runs. It's built on streaks. It's built on coming into your own and then maximizing the time you have while you're in your prime. And I think, as I said a minute ago, Edson Barboza is going down the hill and Dan Hooker's coming up the hill. So I'm going to have to favor the guy who has the momentum. Fortunately for Edson Barboza, he's fighting a guy who's going to strike with him, who's a submission threat, but not someone that's just going to take him down and beat the snot out of him on the ground like Kevin Lee and Khabib did to him. So he does have time in this fight to be Edson Barboza. Dan Hooker trains a lot with Israel Adesanya. I think that's great to get a good look at kicks. Obviously, there's a good size difference there, but as far as just kind of getting a feeling for kicks, I know they have a lot of good kickers in that gym. City Kickboxing in Australia that Dan Hooker trains out of, but or in New Zealand. I get confused. I get very confused about who's out of Whitaker and Adesanya. I keep getting mixed up about which one's New Zealand and which one's Australia. I think that that the New Zealand boys are Israel Adesanya and Dan Hooker, and I think that Robert Whitaker is Australian, but I know Robert Whitaker is born in New Zealand, so I get it all mixed up. But whether it's New Zealand or Australia, those guys have some good strikers in their gym, some real good Muay Thai practitioners. So I think that he'll be well equipped and well trained to deal with Edson Barboza. And I also think the fact that Edson Barboza is going to be coming into this fight, you would have to think he's coming into this fight at an all-time confidence low. And here's another interesting thing: after he lost to Kevin Lee, and please correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but as far as I understand, Edson Barboza moved from Mark Henry's gym with Frankie Edgar and the gang up in New Jersey down to Florida at American Top Team. And I worry when fighters leave, in my opinion, Mark Henry's camp was a good fit for Edson Barboza, and all of that individual attention he was getting there, he's not going to get as much of that at a bigger gym like ATT. And I know ATT is a great gym, arguably the best in the game right now, but that shows me that you're struggling for confidence and you're trying to figure things out when you're moving from a camp that I think was a great fit for you at age 32. Meanwhile, Dan Hooker's still with those same guys. I just think you got to favor Dan Hooker. And also, Edson Barboza has always been kind of chinny, and he's always been vulnerable to a club and sub, getting hurt on the feet and then a submission snatched up. So I'm picturing Dan Hooker stinging him on the feet and then snatching up a Darce choke or a guillotine, kind of similar to kind of similar to how Tony Ferguson beat him. I don't think it's going to be easy. I'm going to take Dan Hooker to win this fight in the third round by submission, kind of club and sub. So yeah, let me just make a note of my pick real quick. Dan Hooker, third round sub. Okay, all right, so that's my pick for that fight. That was a pretty hard pick to make. I'm not entirely confident of it, but I know I'll be watching these fights live. I can't wait. And of course, with this being a Fox card on actual Fox, not Fox Sports, it starts at 8 p.m. Eastern time, and there should only be 4 fights on that main card, so it should be done by like 10:30 at the very worst, probably closer to 10, so that's excellent. Can't wait. So man, we're riding with Dan Hooker. That's a hard pick to make. Let's look at the odds. That's a lightweight fight, of course, by the way. So if we look at the odds here, Dan Hooker is actually a slight favorite. The best odds you can get him at are minus 117, and the highest you can get Edson Barboza at is like plus 103, so it's almost a pick'em fight. Edson Barboza is basically even money, and Dan Hooker's a little bit of a favorite, but I guess that makes me feel a little bit better about my pick, because that's a hard pick to make, but I'm going with that. So we're going to jump right into the main event for this one now. We got Kevin Lee taking on Iaquinta in a rematch, and this one should be good. These guys fought. We're going to go back and find it. We're going to use Iaquinta's record because he fights way less than Kevin Lee, so it'll be easier to find. So Iaquinta is 31 years old now. He's a decent-sized lightweight. Kevin Lee is a huge lightweight, and Kevin Lee is only 26. Kevin Lee lost to Tony Ferguson by submission in that interim title fight, and then beat the aforementioned Edson Barboza in a brutal doctor stoppage in the 5th round back in April, on April 21st. So before that Tony Ferguson won, though, he submitted Michael Chiesa. Before that, he submitted Francisco Trinaldo. Before that, he submitted Magomed Mustafayev. I hope I'm saying that right. Then before that, he TKO'd Jake Matthews. Before that, he won a unanimous decision over Efrain Escudero. And then before that, he got surprisingly TKO'd by Leonardo Santos, who's a jiu-jitsu guy, in just a fight that he said he prepared poorly for and underestimated his opponent. I believe him. So he's looking real good as of late. And then when we look at Iaquinta, he lost to Khabib back in April as well, so it's actually been a little bit longer for him. It's been 2 weeks. He fought 2 weeks before Kevin Lee fought Edson Barboza. He knocked out Diego Sanchez a year before that, and then 2 years before that, he won a split decision against Jorge Masvidal that he did not win. And then before that, he'd beaten Joe Lozon and Ross Pearson, and now we're getting back to when he was more active. It was all the way back on February 1st of 2014 that he won a unanimous decision over Kevin Lee. So that was a long time ago, and since then he has had a decent run of fights. But Kevin Lee has had a lot more fights than him since that time, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, he has. And, you got to favor Kevin Lee to be the fighter that's made more improvements. You got to favor Kevin Lee to be stronger, more powerful, more athletic. I feel like him being younger than Iaquinta was a disadvantage when the age difference was, like 26, 27 to 21. But now that the age difference is 26 to 31, 32, I like that age gap a lot better for Kevin Lee. I think Kevin Lee's gotten way better. I'm not entirely convinced that Kevin Lee is chinny. I'm incredibly biased because Kevin Lee's my favorite fighter currently on the roster, I would have to say. You know, I mean, he's definitely my favorite fighter when he put the whole package together. My favorite fighter to watch fight is TJ Dillashaw. Kevin Lee, though, is my favorite all-around fighter. I think he's the future of this weight class, and I think he's also the future of 165 pounds if they ever open that up, which they won't. So with that being said, I also think he has the potential to be the future of the 170-pound division. I just think this guy has a lot coming his way in the next 5 to 10 years, and I can't wait to see what all actually comes true. But I picture him being quite possibly a two division champion, you know, not necessarily simultaneously, but, you know, over the course of his career, I picture him capturing and defending the lightweight title and then capturing and defending the weight class above, whether that be 165 or 170 by the time we get there. I think it'll still be 170. I've told y'all before, I don't believe the 165-pound division's coming anytime soon. So I'm definitely favoring Kevin Lee to win this fight, undoubtedly. I think that he is a more dangerous, more violent version of Khabib, and I think that he is more suited to, Al Iaquinta is, at the end of the day, he's a good wrestler. So it's harder, you know, it's easier. A guy like Edson Barboza is not a wrestler. He didn't go to an American high school and wrestle or an American college and wrestle, both of which Al Iaquinta did. So in order to control someone who's actually wrestled competitively in their life, and taking it seriously and has a background in that, it's harder to get damage off on them, because when you start focusing on putting damage on them, you're spending less time controlling them, because you can't do both. You can't 100% control someone and damage someone at the same time. So if you want to, let's say you want to do some damage, you might have to go from your 90% controlling them to now you're only 60% controlling them, and that gives them a chance to work back to their feet. I think Kevin Lee is much better at doing that than Khabib is. I think that Kevin Lee will do, we saw that just in comparing their performances against Edson Barboza. I thought Kevin Lee's performance against Edson Barboza was much more impressive, and not just because he got hurt and had to fight back from adversity. I don't think that, I think Al Iaquinta as a power puncher is incredibly overrated, and I'm going to tell you why. We're gonna talk about that really quickly, because I think that this is actually a really important note for this card, and I think this is something that people need to keep in mind. Al Iaquinta, in my opinion, is not a knockout guy. His striking against Khabib was unimpressive, in my opinion. He didn't seem to give Khabib any concerns, and he never, to me, seemed like he was at all close to actually landing anything big. So, in my opinion, him as a power puncher is not really a true thing. I think it's greatly overrated, and here's why I'm going to tell you. So, his professional career, or at least his UFC career, lost to Michael Chiesa, submission. He decisioned Ryan Couture, who has been knocked out a bunch of times in Bellator. He decisioned another gentleman who I've not heard of. He decisioned a very green and inexperienced Kevin Lee, who had zero striking ability and defense, relatively speaking, for a professional fighter at that time. He got submitted by Mitch Clark. His TKOs are against Rodrigo Dam. I know he's actually a pretty decent name. I'm drawing a blank right now. TKO'd Ross Pearson, who at that point in his career, that was in 2014, Ross Pearson gets stopped. TKO'd Joe Lozon, who, when he starts getting hit on the feet, he actually gets tired really quickly when he starts getting tagged up, and he turns into a human punching bag, unfortunately. And then he knocked out, his only clean knockout was against Diego Sanchez, who has been knocked out a lot, and is the only Ultimate Fighter Season 1 competitor still around. And he's been knocked out a lot in his career, and it seems to get easier every year to knock him out. So that doesn't say a lot to me. So where I'm going with this is that I don't think that Al Iaquinta is some big power puncher, some big knockout artist. I don't see it, and I don't see him knocking out Kevin Lee. I don't worry about that. Al Iaquinta does not have a dangerous kicking game, so I don't have to worry about him catching Kevin Lee with some crazy spinning wheel kick like Edson Barboza did when he had Kevin Lee hurt. So where does that leave Al Iaquinta winning a fight? Is he going to stay on the outside and work his jab and win a decision? I think he's too aggressive for that. He's too much of a natural fighter to just do something like that. He wants to get in a fight. But when he opens himself up into a fight, I think that body kick from Kevin Lee is going to be there. I think Kevin Lee would be wise to incorporate some leg kicks. And I think that takedown for Kevin Lee will be there when Iaquinta opens himself up. So I imagine Kevin Lee landing the more powerful strikes, even if Iaquinta might be a little bit more accurate. I think he's going to land that body kick, and I think the takedown will be there when he needs it. And I think he'll stay to a game plan better than Khabib did against Iaquinta, and he might be able to stop him. Iaquinta is so ridiculously tough that it's kind of hard to imagine Kevin Lee stopping him unless he chokes him to sleep. When Iaquinta gets stopped, it's by submission, and he goes to sleep. He doesn't tap because he's Iaquinta. Come on. He's Ragin Al. The dude doesn't tap out. He's super tough. But I do think, and of course someone's probably going to, point out to me the one time he did tap out in his amateur career or something. I don't know. I know the guy's been choked to sleep the 2 times that I've seen him lose. So I think that Kevin Lee is going to have to choke him to sleep or knock him spark out to stop him. But I think he can do that. I think that Kevin Lee will get him on the ground throughout the fight and just wear on him and put damage on him. And I think that in the 4th round, Kevin Lee will be controlling him. And Iaquinta, being the tough fighter he is, will know, I have to get up if I'm going to win this fight. I'm losing a decision. I have to get up and stop this guy. And while he's trying to scramble and get to his feet, he's going to give up his back and he's going to get choked to sleep. He's going to get, so Kevin Lee by rear naked choke in the 4th round is my pick. And I think that that's a pretty good pick, but of course I'm biased because it's me. So we'll have to see how it plays out. I'm really looking forward to this fight card. I can't believe that I'm going to have 3 weekends in a row of doing nothing but watching combat sports. I might do another podcast here in a minute. I want to talk some about the heavyweight top 3 for boxing. I know I mentioned that on my last show, but we'll see. I'll get to that at some point. But right now, that's my UFC on Fox 31 pick. And before I forget, let me give you the odds real quick for that lightweight main event that we just talked about. Kevin Lee is a big favorite at as low as or as high as minus 293. That'd be the best odds. And Iaquinta is as high as plus 257. So the odds makers are definitely seeing Kevin Lee winning the rematch, even though he lost the first one. Like we said, that was 5 years ago when he was incredibly green. And I think that he is an exponentially better fighter than he was back then. Whereas I think Iaquinta is still very similar, still very good, but very similar to how he has always been. So those are my picks. I hope y'all tune in for those fights. Enjoy them. I'll get back on here at some point, and I'll definitely come on Sunday to talk about those fights. Till then, catch you next time.